I mean, the blockchain industry is still very young, and I guess offering infrastructure solutions there can make a lot of sense, and you're filling like an essential kind of need in the market.
The most successful applications in Web3 right now are the ones that can operate across many different networks, which is why we also believe in the ability of multi-chain. Meet your customers where they are.
Wherever developers need you, you're kind of there and help them out.
Developer communities are hard. It's a pain in the ass, but it's worth doing.
Yeah, sounds like it. I mean, when I heard 110 chains, I was like, that's a lot of work. All right, thank you for tuning into the TEACHMEDEFI podcast, another interview episode, which I'm excited about because we're going to dive into infrastructure and developer-focused topics. So excited to say we got James here from SubQuery. Hi, mate. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, yeah, and hopefully we keep this not too technical to bore people too much.
Yeah, we'll try to balance it out. I'm sure we'll be fine. Maybe we keep it quite simple for the start anyway. And could you give us like a brief overview of what SubQuery is, what you guys are doing for those unfamiliar with the project?
Yeah, so SubQuery is a developer tool, and before I kind of explain how it works, maybe best to start with what it solves. If we look at Web 2 and we look around this, the internet as we know it these days, the biggest companies and the most successful companies are the ones that have figured out how to optimize and organize, process, and benefit from large amounts of data. So all those search giants, the social media websites, the way they define, or the kind of thing that sets them apart, is a way that they can manage and deal with large tracts of data. Yes, that data is on us as people, and it's not really a great thing to do, but still, it's about managing big data. And we believe that it will be very similar in Web 3, right? Web 3 does generate a lot of information, and the ability of a company to distill signal from all that information, from all that noise, will also be a differentiating factor between the winners and the losers. So that brings me to what SubQuery does. And SubQuery is what we call a data indexer. And essentially, in simplistic terms, a data indexer's job is to scan the chain and to take the data that you're most interested in, and only that information, and take it off. So a good analogy is like, imagine you're reading a book. Let's say The Lord of the Rings. I'm from New Zealand, so it's a simple analogy for me. And let's say we want to do a quick audit of the number of the last 10 pages that Frodo says something on. We want to index that. We want to show that in a list. The only way, if you're reading this book, the only way that you can actually figure out that information out is by going back page by page and scanning for anything that Frodo said. And that takes a lot of time. Now, the way that data is stored in a blockchain is very similar to a book. A blockchain is a chain of blocks. It's like a book of pages, right? Each page or each block has a discrete amount of information, whatever transactions have happened in that block. And they stay within that block. So when you usually look at a blockchain, you're kind of scanning block by block. You're looking one at a time, just like you're looking at a book. So a simple example of how this might apply in blockchain is if I'm building an application, let's say a wallet, and I want to show a list of the last 10 transactions that a given account has made. It's exactly like asking a book to tell me the last 10 pages that Frodo appears on, right? You don't know which blocks those transactions come in. You just have to scan back in time through them. So essentially what I'm trying to say here is that a blockchain is great for many things. It's great for ensuring the integrity of data, the decentralization of information, the making sure that, obviously that you don't double spend stuff, right, is a very simple example. But it's absolutely terrible in terms of providing that data in an optimized way to applications being built on top of it. And the solution that developers do in order to unlock this data from the blockchain, in order to be able to build these applications on top of blockchain, is by using a process called data indexing. And data indexing, as I said at the start, is a process of scanning a blockchain, taking the data that you're most interested in. So in my case, it's transactions from my smart contract or transactions on my wallet, taking the information off the blockchain and putting it into a more performant medium to retrieve the information from my apps. And we use databases. Databases are a technology that's been around for the last 40, 50 years. It's been optimized well longer than blockchains have existed. And it just means that you have a smaller but more optimized store of the information. So rather than having to scan through those blocks for the last 10 transactions, you can ask the database, give me the last 10 transactions, and it's lightning quick. And so if you're building these applications on top of your blockchain, building a dApp, for example, it's a wallet, an NFT marketplace, a DeFi kind of application that aggregates historical pricing and liquidity volumes of your favorite whatever instrument you want out there. Anything at all, you need access to that data, and so you're going to need an indexer. And so SubQuery, what we build, is a large open source indexer. It's a very open source kind of flexible one, so you can make it index whatever data that you want, and you can index it into any format that you want, and it works to do that for any customer that uses it.
Super interesting. A lot to unpack as well, but I appreciate the level you explained that at. I understood everything, so I hope the listeners do as well. So that essentially, it isn't as easy to read data from a blockchain directly, and then you have sort of like a layer in between where the data is indexed and made more easily readable, and that's sort of like the service you guys are providing.
That's exactly right. So, as I said, blockchains are great at storing information and confirming that information is true and correct, but they're terrible at reading. Just because it's data on a blockchain, if you visualize it, it's like storing data in a novel, in a book, a paperback book. You can't really search it that easily. And so one thing to keep in mind is that we don't get in the way of how you store information. So you still save stuff directly to the blockchain. We never get in the way of that. You don't save information through SubQuery, through a data indexer. That's a bad idea because it might compromise the security of the information. But it just reads information from the blockchain. So you save it to the blockchain, you interact with the blockchain still, but SubQuery and other indexes operate on the side of that to constantly index and kind of reformat and aggregate that information in a better way.
Right. And how should we think about that? Is it like a real-time indexing, or is it like something you done like once in bulk, or you do it regularly in bulk? How does it look?
A combination of both. So let's look at Ethereum has, I think, if you look at a full Ethereum node with all the history, it's like 10 terabytes of information, 10 terabytes of data. Like, it's huge. And so generally our customers, or any customer, they'll want to index history. They want to index, obviously, they'll deploy a smart contract and they want to index from that point in time. They want to know, like, okay, tell me what happens with my smart contract from this point in time. So there is a historical element generally of indexing. But then the one thing that we do focus on, so we focus on two things around performance. One is that the indexing performance. So let's say the smart contract was deployed a long time ago and I make a change in my SubQuery project. I want to be able to quickly re-index to today. And so we do a lot of work to make sure that indexing speed is optimized. And then there's a second aspect, which is how long after something saves to the blockchain does it appear in my SubQuery database? And we do a lot of work on that as well. That's a second aspect of performance. So that's the latency. And there's many different tactics we take. One of them is that for some customers, we'll index data before it's finalized, before it's confirmed. So you might, if you use an exchange, you might have seen sometimes that like wait for 20 confirmations or 200 confirmations for like Polygon, for example. And that means they wait for 200 blocks to be created before they kind of consider it finalized, because reorganizations might happen. And in SubQuery, you can dial that down. So if you want real-time data, you can dial that down and be a bit more risky. That data might not be perfectly accurate, but at least you get you know it as soon as it happens. And SubQuery will automatically like rewrite it if it doesn't work out. Right.
And this decision remains with the application? I'm just thinking security-wise and user experience, like what the user sees and how true it is and all that.
We're a big believer in the open source aspect of SubQuery, right? Like we build a tool. We try to avoid building the data sets with it. We just build the tool that other people use to build data sets for their own need.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very important for us that we give people the flexibility to control and fine tune all these parameters. Now, the application developer will probably set these. So let's say if an application developer is building a application that's used to transfer large volumes of assets with large values, they might dial that down so that like there's a lot of confirmation. So you're very sure that anything that goes through SubQuery is actually true, just like an exchange. They're risk adverse. If you're a high frequency trader and you want to make sure that your data that you get is up to date, and you want to be making trades based off the last block's worth of information, you might dial that so that you get, as soon as data comes in, even though it's not perfectly accurate because your trades are quite small, you just want to make sure that the timeliness information is more important than precision information. So it depends on the application. But for example, we give customers control.
Yeah. So, for example, if it's like a derivatives exchange where they're like focused on high frequency trading, they might pick a shorter time to make sure it's in the block. But then others might be more focused on security and choose a longer confirmation.
Exactly right. And that's the thing about blockchain, right? These different blockchains have different kind of finalization and confirmation periods. Some blockchains, for example, they don't necessarily finalize the block to a certain period of time after, like 6 blocks later. Some chains have reorganizations that happen up to 200 blocks, like Polygon, where there's a lot of like big reorgs that happen suddenly. And some chains promote themselves purely on the fact that they have instant finality. I think Avalanche is doing a big bit of marketing around the instant finality, where they have very minimal reorgs.
Yeah.
So it depends on the chain as well.
Right. So if I think of like decentralized applications on Ethereum, like, I don't know, Aave, Uniswap and all that, are they all also using a data indexer in the back end?
Yeah, so there are 2 leading indexes out there. There's us, and there's a big index called the Graph. The Graph have started a long time ago, and they're the Goliaths in the space. They're one of the original players here. But we also find that when we talk to customers, a lot of teams have actually just built their own indexer. And that's one thing you find. It's such a core piece of that developer toolkit. It's such a core piece of infrastructure for any application that if they're not using the Graph, if they're not using SubQuery, they're probably running their own thing. They've custom built a set of scripts that do this themselves. And we think that's like rewriting the wheel. It's like, it doesn't need, it's not necessary. And so that's what we're focused on, is building that great tool that can be used in different circumstances by different customers.
Right. And you mentioned the Graph, and I think you don't shy away from competition there. I think I saw on your website a comparison with the Graph in terms of your features. Is there anything to say about how you differentiate yourself from those other blockchain data indexers out there?
Yeah, so for us, one of the big things the Graph is performance. We hear this constantly, that the Graph takes time to index, both on that, I mentioned the 2 different performance metrics, the initial sync and then the how up to date it is. And the Graph's initial sync is about, I think it's like a little bit slower than ours. We're doing a lot of work on that performance. But once you're up to date, the latency, they don't give you any ability to customize how finalized or how many block confirmations they require. So that leads me into my second point around what we focus on, and that's the flexibility aspect. We know that our tool will be used by many different customers from many different walks of life, from many different tech stacks, and from many different needs. And so we do a lot of work in making sure that those parameters to fine-tune how it works. And one of the big ones that we get from customers is the Graph are doing a lot of work on their main focus is or I assume their main focus is on launching their network and scaling their network. And one of the ways that this manifests is that they have a laser focus on only allowing projects that are deterministic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit technical here, but essentially, in short, it means that a subgraph, which is graph's project or application of the graph, only is allowed to index information directly from the blockchain. It's only allowed to read information straight from the blockchain, nothing else. Mm-hmm. And we talked to a lot of customers, and this is a bit of a roadblock for a lot of customers, because there's a large variety of information out there in the net that you want to color your application with. So, for example, I'm building a DEX, or I'm building an NFT marketplace, for example, and I'm indexing using SubQuery the recent transactions of a particular NFT. Let's say I want a transaction history of my NFT. Very simple SubQuery project that many customers do. And I want to show on my front end, I want to show the US dollar value of that transaction at that point in time. Mm-hmm. Very simple requirement, It's a great user experience. Like people can recognize $32 better than they can recognize 0 point something ETH,
Yeah.
Okay? Because the subgraph only allows you to index data from the chain, the subquery doesn't have that restriction. So in your subquery project, when you're indexing these transactions, you can make a request to CoinGecko to get that latest, exchange rate at that point in time. And you can save that into your index data set. So you're going to make that one API call and get everything you need. You can make a request to IPFS to get more information about the NFT at that point in time. You can make an external, you can import a library to do some conversions or something. We don't have that restriction on deterministicness. We don't force you to only index stuff from the chain, because we want to give more flexibility to our developers to be able to do more. And then the last thing we do a lot differently is that our origins are outside of EVM. So apart from also supporting a lot more networks that the graph doesn't support that are non-EVM specific networks, we also realize a lot of customers of ours are building cross-chain applications. Mm-hmm. So they're building an application like a bridge or like a marketplace that spans different chains. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at the user experience for these applications, they want to build one user experience. They don't want to have to build a switcher at the top right that says, I'm switching from Polygon now to Arbitrum, or I'm switching from Polygon to Ethereum, Mm-hmm. You want to see from a user experience one page with everything in it, regardless of what chain you're in, okay? It's kind of, that's we need to stop looking at these networks as their own islands. Yeah. We need to look at like my Web3 presence as a whole thing, and that's something we believe in. So we've done a lot of work to be able to index multiple networks, different networks, into the same subquery project and combine that information to one place.
Right. Okay. So, two things there. One, in the scenario of having also including data from CoinGecko, for example, so non-deterministic, I think you called it, right? So if you were using the graph, you would have to have a separate kind of API call that data. And then maybe you have to run some operations on your own backend to associate it with the blockchain data. So it's like extra work, essentially, is it then?
Exactly right. Mm. Or you'd have to run a Uniswap subgraph alongside, which is an expensive subgraph to run. It's quite a big one to just get that US dollar value for that asset from Uniswap, because that data is on the chain. Right. But again, the point here is that you have to jump through a lot more hoops to do it, or do a lot more work to do that. And we think that's a terrible developer experience.
So in terms of developer experience, do you, what do developers say, how their, say, for example, productivity changes when they use your services? Or do you have like a grasp on that? Can you say something to that?
We've had customers say, I remember once I was talking to a customer in a network called Moonbeam, and they were just about to build an NFT marketplace. Mm-hmm. And they just started on this. And we managed to talk to them, and they're like, basically, it transpired that they were just launching into building an index themselves until they learned about us. And we got a quote from them saying something like, thank God we met you guys, because without you, we saved, or with you, we saved like 2 months of development effort building our own indexer. So In terms of people building their own new projects that have been built, we can save a lot of developer time compared to running it your own. In terms of people migrating their projects, we get a lot of feedback that the developer experience is actually, we've tried to make it as similar as possible to the graph, just to make it familiar to developers. If you've developed a subgraph before, the developer experience in SubQuery is very similar. So you have the fundamental understanding of how it works, which is very important, right? When you're using a new framework or a tool, I think the most important part is getting the fundamental understanding of like, these are the key points, this is the key process.
Yeah.
And then like you can fine tune that over time. But once you get an idea of like the key steps to follow through and what at a high level these steps mean, you're pretty much on your way to learning how to use a tool. And so we've maintained those kind of high level key steps and key kind of like processes as the graph, intentionally so.
And you mentioned you're on different chains, so to say. You serve different blockchains. What's the story there? Where did you start? Was your start in Polkadot? And what's your experience now with all these different chains? And
Our start was in Polkadot, and we started doing another kind of thing in Polkadot, and we kept talking to potential customers, and they keep moaning about the fact that there were no indexes, which meant they all had to build their own thing. And when I come from a product management background, and when you come from a product management background, you start hearing different customers say the same thing about a big pain point they have. It's like it's you get quite excited as a product manager. Like it's there's no better words to hear. There's music to your ears. So we went away and we hacked together a data indexer in a few weeks, and then since then it's kind of grown. I think one of the things that Polkadot gave us from the start, and Polkadot, for those that don't know, is basically trying to build a core kind of SDK that anyone can use to build their own application chain. And these application chains are called parachains, and they're all kind of connected to each other. They all talk the same language, and they are inherently kind of connected, so that assets can move between these different chains, or these app chains, these parachains. But it meant that from day one, we always had to think about this has to work across all of these different parachains. And then, it's an easy step, go from there to think, okay, this all has to work across all these different other networks as well. And so from Polkadot, we moved into Cosmos, into Algorand, into Near. We kind of initially focused on the non-EVM networks because there were no existing indexes for non-EVM networks. The graph had kind of ignored them for a long time.
So you could fill a gap immediately. Yeah,
exactly right. And got a lot of success, especially in Cosmos, because a lot of apps have been built on Cosmos. That there are no kind of alternatives. And finally, we are earlier this year we took the plunge into EVM, and since then we're kind of adding support to as many different EVM-based networks as possible. I think we now support about over 110 different networks. We have example projects, like we've tested support for over 110 networks, and we publish example projects for those. In truth, we support any Cosmos-based network, any Polkadot-based network, and any EVM-based network that we've tried so far. Like that's how we build it. And going back to the hypothesis here, which is that we want to be where developers are building. So when you're building a developer tool, like we are, the main thing for you is to meet developers where their needs are. And regardless if you're building on Algorand or Near or on Cosmos or Polkadot or Polygon, Arbitrum, Ethereum itself, we want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to build your applications. And that's been a big driving force of SubQuery for the last year and a half. And we've kind of achieved it beyond our wildest dreams in the last year and a half. It's definitely caused some growth pains. Doing BD work across 100 ecosystems is a pain in the ass. But that's part of the fun, right? But it just means that, a developer working over here might go somewhere else for the next project and think, SubQuery also works here. I used them over there before, and the developer experience is very similar over here, so I'm just going to use them again.
Right. So in terms of, the blockchain industry is still very young, and I guess offering infrastructure solutions there can be quite can make a lot of sense, and you're filling like an essential kind of need in the market. We have a liquidity crunch at the moment. A lot of other decentralized applications are not yet profitable business models. But can you say something to the complexity of 110 chains? That sounds a lot to me to manage all that. And is there stuff that's more interesting as well, like in terms of, for example, Polkadot and kind of that multi-chain character where chains can communicate to other ones? And then in terms of data indexing, is that more tricky but also more interesting? Can you talk about this stuff?
From the complexity perspective, technically, they're once you support one Polkadot chain or one Cosmos zone or one EVM-based network and you build that support with the plan to support all of those variants, it's not that difficult to kind of expand to all implementations of those. We're kind of lucky that the market or the development market has kind of coalesced around a few different SDKs. And there are some weird and wonderful chains out there still coming up. We're finding that in this day and age, if you're launching a new network, it will be of one of two variants. It will be a EVM-based roll-up for layer 2. And a lot of people are building on the OP stack, for example, recently, or a Polygon supernet or an Avalanche subnet, all very kind of simple EVM-based kind of variants. Or you're building a Rust-based WASM chain. That's the other option we're seeing a lot these days. And that's on Polkadot, for example, on Cosmos. Stellar's new smart contract language is the same. There's a bunch of small other chains coming through that way. And we're seeing that kind of come through. In terms of last year, we really saw the start of the dawn of the app chain come through, and it still continues to this day, I believe. Cosmos's year was last year, and there was a massive growth in the number of Cosmos zones that have been launched. In fact, every new network that wanted to launch a zone or their own kind of app chain was doing it on Cosmos. You had, for example, DYDX, a bunch of different exchanges like OKEX, Crypto.com, Huobi. I think
those chains. Those chains are on Cosmos. I didn't know that.
All those exchanges kind of supported a chain to launch in their kind of image.
Okay.
They're all on Cosmos.
Right.
I think, obviously BNB is on EVM, one of the other options, but, there was a lot of different ones on Cosmos at the time. This year we're seeing a bit more effort return back to the EVM side of things. So we're seeing a lot more activity in OP stacks and other layer 2 rollups this year. But still, you're seeing a lot of people saying, look, the tooling now to build your own blockchain is very simple. Like launching your own blockchain these days isn't that hard. There's a lot of really good SDKs out there, a lot of really good tools out there. It's very easy to launch your own purpose-built app chain where you can fine-tune the parameters for your needs. And you can, decrease the gas fees because you want high throughput, for example, for your use case. And so we're seeing a lot of people building app chains. At least the app chains are kind of coalescing around these different SDKs, which make it easier for us. It does make a challenge now for BD, as I said before. But, one thing I'm curious to see is, especially coming into the next bull cycle, what these different app chains are going to be doing to attract builders into those chains. And as I said, as a kind of a third at the start, the biggest DeFi or the most successful applications in Web3 right now are the ones that can operate across many different networks. So, you look at the top dApps, they will generally operate on multiple different networks. which is why we also believe in the ability of multi-chain. You have to really be able to meet your customers where they are.
Got you. So wherever developers need you, you're kind of there and help them out. And how do you make sure that the data is accurate that you index?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do a lot of work and a lot of automated testing on any of our builds to make sure that we never skip a block, we never miss any information. We always make sure we pick up everything. So the way you build a SubQuery project in a nutshell is you kind of like, you set trigger points. And your trigger points might be a certain function call or a certain event that you're looking for from your contract. So let's say you're building an NFT contract and you wanted to index all transactions. You might set a trigger point of all transactions involving anything created by your contract. Or you might want to index any time an NFT is minted. So you have a event called minted token. And you will index, you put a trigger point to any event on chain or any Ethereum log that matches that criteria. And then you define mapping functions. So anytime SubQuery will scan the chain, anytime it encounters something that matches these triggers, it will do something and it will run a little function. And that function will receive that information and it will process that information. And you just write that function using simple coding language, TypeScript, and it will save the information in the format that you want. So I might, for example, my NFT app, I might save anytime there's a transaction related to an NFT, I might save the date it happened, the price it occurred for, who sent and received it, what NFT ID it was, and what the USD value of that is right now. And in my mapping function, I take the information off, I save it. I might also make an API called CoinGecko to get the latest USD price. I'll save that information to the database. Now, that process themselves, we just make sure it never skips anything. So it's very simple logic that you define to make sure that you're indexing the right information. And we trust that your code is bug-free. In terms of, we're building a network. So when you run a SubQuery, you have to run a SubQuery project. And running the infrastructure is quite hard. So we're building a network that you can, once you write your project and you define the process, you can give it to the world and say, can someone out there please run this project for me and run it in a production sense so I can start making requests for my app to that. And you might want to get 2 or 3 people to run it just in case one goes down, right? Because if your app goes down, then it's not a good look. So you might get 2 people or 3 people across the world in different places that don't know each other to run it. And in our decentralized network, we've done a lot of work to make sure we can't prove that one person has indexed data correctly. We can't prove that. It's impossible to prove that they have indexed data correctly. But what we can prove is that 2 independent, don't know each other, well, we hope they don't know each other, but independent indexes that are running this project around the world, we can prove that they have the same data. We can prove that they are in agreement that this is the right data. And so we do a lot of work on that side of things as well. The proof of indexing, the proof that the data is the same between 2 different parties.
So there's decentralization to it as well. And what's the incentive for those parties running that graph?
Yeah, so we're building a network, and the way that works is if you want your, let's say my NFT app, I will pay for indexing services from these indexes using SubQuery tokens or using our stable coins that will be converted behind the scenes automatically, and they will be rewarded in these tokens for indexing the information. Now, there's delegators involved as well, so normal people that aren't technical can also delegate and support their favorite indexer and receive a cut of the rewards that indexer receives. So there's a bit of tokenomics in this, but essentially we've built a system where that an indexer that you have no relation to, that you don't know who they are, you can make sure that they're rewarded for doing the work they do. And if they don't perform the work they do, if they go down, if they provide incorrect data, you can slash them, and they are penalized for not acting correctly. But the whole point of this is to build this network that we can provide indexes, and that you as an application developer, you don't have to worry about finding these indexes. You don't have to worry about talking to them. You don't have to worry about setting up agreements or contracts. You just put it out there and the network deals with the rest. So the network pure goal is providing index data that is verified, is correct, and is performant and scalable to your application, wherever your users of your application might be in the world.
And where do you run these transactions then, like the stablecoin payment and all that, or even your network? Is this a chain itself, or?
Yeah, so we're built we're currently running a kind of a pre-mainnet. So we're trying to build up the scale on both sides before we launch the mainnet, just to make sure that all the contracts are working well and there's no bugs or security issues before we launch the real token. But as real indexes indexing real information on this pre-mainnet right now, and receiving real rewards, of course. At the moment, it's in Polygon. That's where we're running the pre-mainnet right now. So there's a real network out there. You can kind of go in there and act as an indexer and participate. If you want, you can acquire some KSQT, our kind of our pre-net mainnet token, and you could operate as a delegator. You could start staking some KSQT or delegating some KSQT to your favorite data indexes and start participating if you wanted to. But yeah, we're just making sure that this thing is operating in a sustainable way right now. And that's what the whole purpose of this pre-mainnet is. Rather than launch the network as a big bang and kind of, you haven't built up both sides of the equation, the demand and the supply side, which has happened to many other projects out there where they kind of forgot one side and suddenly all the supply, well, what are we doing, is kind of pointless. Like, for example, there's a lot of empty block space right now in Web3 where there's all these validators that are validating blocks, but nothing's happening in those blocks. They're validating nothing. We want to make sure that it's sustainable. There's a right amount of supply and demand.
Right.
And a pre-mainnet is a great way to kind of make sure we encourage that to start with.
Right. And will it then be a layer 2 on Ethereum, or what?
We don't have any plans to do that at the moment. Long term it might be, but we don't need if you want to build an app chain, there's a lot of work involved with building an app chain. And I think for the size of SubQuery and for the performance that SubQuery requires, just working on those layer 2s, those existing layer 2s, will be sufficient. Right. It's working as an EVM smart contract, and it's good enough for now. We don't need super high block rates. We don't need super high throughputs. We don't need tons of block space.
Yeah.
We'll try to optimize this as much as possible. So we're quite flexible in terms of where we launch that mainnet.
Okay. And in terms of, bootstrapping this ecosystem, like you said, how do you engage with the developer community or even parties that could stake? And what channels are also best for someone, developer or other stakeholder, to contribute to you guys or learn about you guys? And
Yeah, we have a pretty big developer community. I think we're about 60,000 developers in our Discord. And SubQuery itself is open source, so we also have bounties for people to perform challenges and to actually add functionality to a product that we want to add. So we're trying to open up more of SubQuery to be more kind of community driven rather than the SubQuery team actually kind of building everything and being the bottleneck, if you will. But one thing that we're doing a lot more effort into is we have a lot of experts or expert SubQuery developers in our community. And when we talk to some customers, they're like, yeah, we want to build this new product, but we don't really, we're time constrained. We're trying to build up more SubQuery experts so that we can say, well, here's a workforce of experts that could build this indexer for your project to your spec very quickly. And they'd find it very easy because they're very familiar with it. Do you want us to put you in touch with them? And so that's one thing, that if a developer is out there wanting to get involved, we have a bunch of bounties on our website, and we'll be having more soon around customer projects of a customer out here wants to build this, who wants to sign up and be on the team to kind of do that for them.
Very interesting.
Developer communities are hard. It's it's you have to provide great documentation. You have to engage with them a lot, and it's very hard. Documentation is very hard to do. As soon as you write it, it's out of date. literally the second you publish it, it's out of date. It's kind of annoying sometimes. And it's a constant uphill battle that no one thanks you for. But we've done a lot of effort into our documentation. There's thousands of lines of documentation of every feature that we have. And it's a pain in the ass, but it's worth doing. It's critical.
Right. Yeah, sounds like it. I mean, when I heard 110 chains, I was like, that's a lot of work. And in terms of, is there any risk of centralization? I mean, you guys are actively working on decentralizing that solution anyway, but when everyone uses the same data indexing solution or something, is there something to be said of for the importance of having different data indexers? And for example, when you have Lido for liquid staking on Ethereum, some say this is an inherent risk that everything's in that protocol. What do you think about that?
No, there's inherent. Look, there's two different types of centralization, and let's be clear, centralization is a spectrum. There is no perfect answer. There's a trade-off with over decentralization. Now, go back a year or two, and all Ethereum projects that were using external index were using the graph, and the graph had a hosted service that many used, and many times it went down. When you're building production infrastructure, it's not if, it's a when does it go down. It's a matter of just life. And, when the graph went down, many projects just stopped working. Let's put the hands up, we can't help, the graph's down, we rely on the graph. So building a network like what we're doing is designed specifically to stop that. So the network might go down. It's contracts though, so less likely it's not running production infrastructure. But we'll decentralize the hosting of these projects to thousands of people, so it's unlikely that they all go down. In terms of the decentralization aspect, having more than one provider providing an open source indexer on one ecosystem is a good thing. We think it's a good thing to have choice. Pushes us to be better, pushes the graph to be better. So there's a decentralization aspect there that, yes, you can rely on the graph, and they're pretty fine, but not a bad idea to have your projects running in two different places, just in case. If I usually use this, I have this diagram that I quite like to bring out sometimes, and it shows a tech stack of a dApp. So if you're building a dApp, this are the kind of pieces that you have. You have your front end, which might be written in React, which connects to the chain via an RPC provider. And they are another example of centralization. Like if you're using Infura or Alchemy, they probably go down at some point. Infura went down a couple of years back and it took everything offline. You might be using an Oracle. They're kind of decentralized, which are good, but there are some centralization there. You might be using a off-chain storage like IPFS or something else. But generally, the indexer and the RPC till now have been the most centralized components. So we're doing our best to decentralize indexer, and there are other providers doing their best to decentralize the RPC provider as well. So we're just trying to, we're still very early days in the developer experience of Web3. It still feels like the late 90s of the internet, where there was a bunch of scam projects, pets.com, that everyone was like, this is a shady business, man, what's going on? But behind the scenes, there's a lot of people building these fundamental building blocks of the internet in the 90s. And they're building all these kind of under the hood stuff that are so many layers deep, but they're still there today. And I think it's the same in Web3, where there's a lot of tools and infrastructure pieces being built and perfected right now, which will enable these next level of applications on top of them to be built. These applications that will look and feel and perform like a Web2, a centralized application. Because I think if we want to bring in the next generation of people into Web3, the application can't be a horrible user experience. It can't be so broken and hacky that only someone that's invested in this ecosystem will want to use it. It's got to feel great. It's got to work fast and be snappy and look and feel like an application that isn't decentralized. And so, at SubQuery, that's a big kind of mission for us, and it's one thing that drives the way that we act every day. Is about building that tool that can be used for that future.
That was interesting. What I kind of heard, there are hidden security and performance bottlenecks in the infrastructure stack in Web3, and you guys are actively working on that front, which is really exciting. So on that note, what's next for you guys? What are you excited about coming up?
Yeah, we're just kind of spending more and more time in the EVM side of things. We're doing a lot more workshops and adding some more chains there as well. We've just recently passed, I think, 110 supported networks, which is a big milestone for us. But we're going to go more and more. We're also working on our pre-mainnet network, and we're looking at how we convert that to a network. We're starting to add custom projects to that. We're getting very close to launching a network very soon, because things are going really well for us in terms of projects. But, the mission never stops being what it is, which is build a great product, a great developer tool that developers need and solves their problems. And that mission will never change, I don't think, anytime soon. So really, we're just keeping our heads down and helping build tools that help others build that future that we're all hoping for in Web3.
Well, we wish you all the best for that, for sure. And yeah, at that rate, you're going to be supporting chains that I have never heard of. So exciting. And yeah, thank you for coming on and, explaining all this in a very easy to understand fashion. I learned a lot, and happy to have you on anytime again. And
thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you, James. Bye.